and CEO of Global Minded. We are all about creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented, and first generation to graduate high school and college into the education, employment, and economic mobility pipeline. We're delighted that you've joined us today. It's a special day today. It's Educator Appreciation Day, Teacher Appreciation Day, and any way in which you educate others, we want to really salute you. We have an incredible lineup today for you on a topic that's really timely during COVID-19. It's called Meeting Students' Needs During the Extended Time of School Closures. So we know that meeting students' needs really means being able to work effectively with teachers in lots of ways that they can be supported. So the people who are part of this today are here to provide that insight. And we very much appreciate their taking time out of their busy schedules. It's a pleasure to launch this to Dr. Carissa Miller. Everybody today is a doctor. I'm the only one who's not a doctor, so I'll say it's intimidating to be with all of you. But Dr. Carissa Moffat Miller is the Executive Director of the Council of Chief State School Officers, CCSSO, where she works with state education chiefs to ensure all students have the opportunity to graduate from high school and be prepared for college, career, and life. With a deep understanding of education policy and the state national levels, Carissa leads CCSSO's efforts to help states deliver equitable education opportunities to every student. She is a first-generation college graduate. Many of you read her story in our newsletter a couple of months ago. And she was named Executive Director of CCSSO in 2018 after serving for nearly 5 years as Deputy Executive Director overseeing membership, advocacy, communications, data, and information services. Prior to that, she was a Deputy Superintendent at Idaho State Department of Education and led the implementation of statewide online testing for Idaho State Board of Education. She holds her PhD in education from the University of Idaho and a master's degree in sociology from the University of Wyoming, and bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So lots of states in your background that are close to where Global Mind headquarters are here in Denver. And we're fortunate to have a lot of Colorado-based people on the panel today. So Carissa, thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you, Carol, and it's good to be with all of you today. I think it's best to say that I just worked my way through states, getting degrees, and then did a reset and got back over onto the East Coast. So maybe I'll just have to start making my way back across the United States with degrees. But thank you for the opportunity to be here. Also want to just give an acknowledgement on Teacher Appreciation Day. No more than important in this environment about how important teachers really are to our system. And those of us as parents home with our kids even realize it even more today, but a special appreciation for all of our teachers. I'm gonna just give a quick overview about a few things from CCSSO, and then my fellow panelists are going to do the same for their organizations, and then we'll do some Q&A towards the end. I'm going to just do an overview on rapid response on COVID-19 for us. I'm going to talk about some critical decisions still to be made, and then just briefly touch on some funding issues from the federal level for what we're working on. Carol mentioned our organization, CCSSO, which is a mouthful until you get it down. And probably the best way to describe it is that one of our esteemed members is on this panel. Katy Anthes is the chief, we like to call them chiefs in Colorado. They're the people who lead the K-12 education systems across every state, territory, the District of Columbia, Bureau of Indian Education, and the Department of Defense. And so our organization supports people like Katy in all that they do. That's probably the best way to know us. You know, I'm really proud of our members and how they've stepped up in so many ways. It's been a fast and furious 7 or 8 weeks. I lose track of how much actual time we've spent here, but it was just a matter of weeks when all of these came to be, and we closed down schools, we closed down whole states for business, and it was imperative that meals got to kids still, that we set up distance learning, that we provide childcare for first responders, And the people who serve in our membership had to just make quick decisions to do those things and to be there for the people who need them the most. And it wasn't like we had a lot of time and a lot of on-ramp to figure that out. I want to share just a few highlights of places that I think are doing great work. And I leave Colorado out because there's plenty of people from Colorado here that can tell you their story themselves. I'll use other states. In Kansas, the bus drivers are dropping off and picking up packets of student work and school meals. In South Carolina, they put Wi-Fi on buses for more than 45 school districts and send them to where the Wi-Fi is lacking for those students so they can have broadband. Massachusetts and a number of other states have partnered with public television to broadcast educational content. And Virginia expanded its online learning system to allow every teacher in the Commonwealth to host virtual classes while school buildings are still closed. Pennsylvania also put forward $5 million for equity grants for schools to purchase computer equipment, laptops, tablets, internet, hotspots, ensuring that they were going to students lacking resources. Those are just a few examples of how we're trying to serve all students in the country. And we know that those challenges aren't over and that not all needs are being met. And so some of the critical decisions still to be made. As an organization this week, well, it may actually have been last week now, we put out a framework called Restart and Recovery. We've been in rapid response mode, states have and we have as their partners, and we're moving towards that. What does restart and recovery look like? We bucketed that into 4 areas that we think still need additional work. And one, first and foremost, is the social emotional needs of students who come back in trauma-informed practice. There will be even greater needs than what we saw from students who were in school before. We've been honing in this week on health and safety protocols to when we get to the place where we're reopening schools, like what does that look like? How do we address those needs? How do we know how far apart kids need to be? Do we do extra hand washing and all of those kinds of questions have to be answered. We also have to hone in on how we recover learning loss. Because while all those things that I mentioned are super helpful and there are a lot of great things going on, we do know that there will have been learning loss during this time, and it has to be addressed, and we have to be able to know what to do about that. And that gets to the 4th one, which is summer programming, and where we'll address with summer programming what we'll be able to do during the summer if it's still a virtual environment. The third thing that I want to just mention is about funding, and that is that we've been working very closely here in Washington, D.C. on the CARES Act funding. Most of this money is starting to go out now to states and to districts. And it is so much needed for those immediate expenses that showed up right when we started to provide extra busing or meals or any of the extra cleaning or any of the extra work that needed to happen. But I will say that we are working tirelessly that there needs to be yet an additional supplemental for the expenses that will come. And that could be addressing also revenue decreases, which the part of this panel, we can talk about the revenue decreases in states, and the needs will continue to be even more greater than they have been to this point. So we believe that there is a real need for an additional supplemental package. So I will stop there, and Carol, I'll let you kick it to our next presenter.
Great, thank you so much, Carissa. So Dr. Lawrence Hernandez formerly was Chief Quality Officer for HCA Healthcare and also is now really committed to a new organization helping students really fund their education at a time where resources, as Carissa just mentioned, are going to be scarce on a lot of different levels. So Dr. Hernandez, great to meet you and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, and I'm so excited to be part of this organization and this panel. I'd like to start with an example. When I was growing up as a young man in a barrio in the east side of Pueblo, Colorado, I had a dream to travel around the country. And I got this idea stuck in my head that I wanted to go to the beach in Santa Cruz, California, after reading a book by John Steinbeck. And I also read a poem by Robert Frost and thought, wouldn't it be beautiful to go to the woods of New Hampshire? And I logically understood how to get there because I could navigate on any map or any globe of the world. But financially, I had no idea. How would I get there? How would I pay for gas? Where would I stay? What would I do to make a living? All of those ideas went through my head. But in the 8th grade, I read a book where the protagonist became a lawyer and traveled around the country. And I thought, simple, go to college. That's how I can travel around the world. Now, recall that between 0 and 18 years old, I had never had a single conversation with a peer, an adult, or my parents about what it meant to go to college. My parents simply did not have the lexicon, the language, the context, or the experience to have that conversation. It wasn't that they didn't care about my future. And my peers had equally no experiences because they knew no one that actually went to college. But in the 8th grade, I thought that was my avenue. Time passed and I worked very hard in school. By my senior year, I was at the top of my graduating class of 400 kids. But I hadn't done anything to prepare for college, and no one had ever spoke to me. So I went down to the counselor's office one day, saw a bunch of brochures and applications, started pulling them all out, filling them, completing them, saw a counselor going by. So 4 years, never spoke to a counselor in my high school, even though I was top of my class. Saw the counselor, took the stack and said, hey, can you help me with these? And the counselor said, oh yeah, it looks like everything's complete. You've got your $20 checks. I looked at him like, checks? He said, yeah, it costs money to apply to college. And I said, well, I have no money. And he said, no problem. We have waivers and there's other things we can do. Take care of it for you. Fast forward to my senior awards assembly. It was going to be a great day because this is when they were going to announce who got accepted to college and who got a scholarship. I got an award for Eagle of the Year, top student of my high school. And they started alphabetically with the A's and they were going to the Z's of who got the scholarships. And they got to the Joneses and I said, they skipped my name, I'm sure they'll come back. And then the Moores and the Smiths and then all the way to the end, and I sunk in my chair in that huge assembly hall. And I was destroyed. I got up out of that assembly, got on my bike, rode home, and there was my dad sitting at the kitchen table. And he said, ¿Qué pasó? What's wrong with you? And I said, well, I'm not going to be a doctor because that's what I wanted to be. And I said, I didn't get a scholarship or I didn't get admitted to college. He said, let's go. Walked out the door, slammed behind me, went down the stairs, across the grass, got in my dad's 1967 light blue Chevy Impala, jumped on the highway, started driving. I said, oh my God, where are we going? Where is this man taking me? Sooner or later, we got to the college, which was near my hometown. Started looking around, saw biology, psychology, chemistry building, administration. He pulled up right in front. Walked straight in the building. There was a directory. At the top, it said Dr. Lyle Wilcox, president of the university. Pressed the 3rd floor, and I said, uh-oh. Went up, walked down the hall, beautiful wooden doors, plush green carpet, and there was a secretary sitting in front of Dr. Wilcox's office. And my dad, with his arms folded, said, I need to talk to you about my son, and I want to talk to the president. Well, sir, do you have an appointment? No, I don't have an appointment, but this is important. Sir, you can't go speak to the president. You need to have an appointment. Of course, my dad was an argumentative guy. Started arguing back. It was a huge ruckus. I thought she was going to pick up the phone and call the police. And the president comes out of his office and said, what's going on? I said, sir, this man wants to talk to you about his son. He says it's important. President, big 6'4" guy, says, come on over. Here's my dad, this little 5'4" Mexicano. And they're face to face. And my dad says, I need to talk to you about my son. So they had a conversation, never knew what happened. But when I got home that day, I got a phone call and I was told I got $500 to go to college. It was the first time in my life that I asked the question, how does the world work? How does this process work? How did this occur? Now, I believe with COVID-19 and the pandemic that is upon us, it has highlighted the same kinds of issues that we were at 30 years ago. Because now we were at a tipping point then, but we had some intermediary CBOs and churches and mutualistas and other organizations to buffer the challenges that we face. But as families have become more dispersed around the country, those simply don't exist. And now we depend on our schools and our other institutions more than ever. For Latinos and first-generation students and low-income students, this pandemic, I believe, can be catastrophic. We already know that unless we reach out in a dramatic way to young people, they will not go to college. They will not complete the FAFSA, which is the #1 predictor of going to college. They do not have health information. Their parents do not have insurance. They've lost their jobs. They can't get stimulus checks. School districts are trying to respond, but again, it's a crisis mode. And we are again at a tipping point, and we have to do something dramatic. And I call it healthy intrusiveness, and that's where I'd like to leave it today, is that there is a model for how we can start to engage young people in this crisis.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. And I'm glad that you shared your personal story, because Global Minded is the network for students who don't have a dad like yours or a mom like yours. And that's really the whole reason that we exist. So hoping to create millions of people like you and Carissa. So thank you so much for that. And now let's hear from Dr. Katy Anthes, so she can share some of what Carissa gave us a perspective on, but really at the state level with the kinds of programs that she's been managing with all of the different types of educators in her purview. So Katy, welcome.
Great, thank you, Carol. Yeah, I do need to start my remarks by saying this is Teacher Appreciation Week, and we have 55,000 teachers across the state of Colorado, and I want to give a huge shout out and social distance hug to all of them, because they are working tirelessly. There may be many of you on the call today, and thank you, thank you, thank you for everything you're doing all the time, but especially what you're doing now during this unprecedented moment in our history. As Carissa said, I am the Chief State School Officer in Colorado. In Colorado, I'm the Commissioner of Education. We oversee 178 school districts across Colorado. We really see our role as supporting our school districts. So we have Denver Public Schools on with us today. We support them in the implementation of all of the state laws and federal laws, and provide some support services as well. So I'm really proud of the state of Colorado. I'm proud of all of our districts as they have responded to this crisis in such a positive way. I'll just say a few things about CDE's role during this pandemic. As a state agency, we are in the middle of the crisis response. When the governor declares a state of emergency in the state, all agencies come together to an emergency management operations team, and we all work together to determine how we respond to the health and safety needs of our community. And obviously schools are a critical element in that. So schools, as Carissa mentioned, have a number of roles in that, but first of all, in addition to learning, in general, we provide a lot of support and childcare to families as they're dealing with work. We supply a lot of food for our students. So we give breakfast and lunch to students across the state of Colorado. Many students who are free and reduced lunch, and so they depend on that food for 2 meals a day. So as a part of our crisis response, we helped stand up 500 emergency feeding sites across the state of Colorado. to do properly socially distanced food pickup and drop off. I also have to give an enormous shout out to our food service workers across the state of Colorado. They are doing this day in, day out, hours upon end. It's relentless for them as well. So we work with our other state agency partners, health, the governor's office, to say what decisions need to be made and how do we evolve with this crisis as it moves on. So we are a part of that team. We worked right alongside the governor in making decisions about school closure, and we actually intentionally don't call it school closure. We say that we have suspended in-person learning, which means that students are not coming to the school buildings, except for in very small instances, but instead we are engaging, and our teachers and our administrators and our counselors are engaging with students in whatever way they can across our state. Now, the challenge is that our state has different capacities depending on the district you're in. So some of our districts have broadband and devices for all of their students, some do not. And so this really has highlighted some inequities that are very challenging to overcome, but we are working very hard on that. As soon as we determined we needed to suspend in-person learning, actually before we determined that, CDE worked very hard to stand up an entire set of resources, websites. How can you do remote learning? How can you stay engaged? And really that was the very first thing we talked about. The most important thing is just staying engaged with our families. When you're in a crisis situation, yes, we want to learn and we want to get back to learning, but we also need to make sure sort of the bottom, you know, the most important foundational aspects, like, do we know where you are? Are you safe? Do you have food? You know, what do you need for your family at this time? So we really worked on those bottom, those most important foundational elements first. And then we said, you know, as we get ready, how can we move to learning and remote learning? And so we're working hard on that right now. We also recognized that because of this differentiation across our state in what districts are prepared to do for remote learning, we worked with our partner organization, the Colorado Education Initiative, to launch a needs assessment survey for all of our districts to really get detailed information about how many devices are needed out there, how many districts don't have Wi-Fi, how, you know, what other types of support and wraparound services are needed in your community. So we have a pretty comprehensive needs assessment now that can actually be split apart by region. And we are using that needs assessment to now drive the federal dollars that Carissa talked about, the Education Cares Act money, as well as philanthropic efforts in Colorado to say if a foundation wants to support education, now we can say, great, Southwest Colorado is having serious trouble with Wi-Fi. Can you purchase them, you know, 100 Wi-Fi spots? So now we have the ability to link resource needs with the helpers. And at the beginning of this crisis, it was a little hard because everyone wanted to help, but it was hard to coordinate all that. And the time it took was very challenging. So it's still hard because there's still a lot of coordination that needs to happen, but at least we have some specifics where we can broker services between people who are willing and able to help, and with some of our districts that have given us exactly what they need. And then lastly, I just want to say, you know, what we're trying to do, this is really how do we support our at-risk students. You know, I agree with Dr. Hernandez that this could be catastrophic. The amount of gaps that we're seeing, the fact that we actually can't reach some of our families Our districts are trying very, very hard to reach every single family, but there are some families we haven't been able to reach since we suspended in-person learning. So we are going to have a lot of work over the summer, next year, and the year after to reconnect and re-engage with these families and find ways to reach out to the most at risk among us and get them the supports they need. We are at the very, very beginning of that process. We have not been able to reach all of our students. We are putting plans in place right now about summer and how do we find them? I mean, when you think about all the families that have lost their jobs and are moving and are mobile, it's very difficult to find all of these folks when there's not a central place they can come to gather and get information. So we are using our needs assessment. We are going to try to target our CARES Act funds and our governor's Emergency Act funds to the most at-risk populations. We still need to figure out the proper vehicles for that, how we reach them. And then the next thing we're focused on is what does next year look like and how do we build those wraparound services next year for many of the challenges that our young students and families will have faced over this whole summer period. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Katy. And I have had the ability to watch Katy on the ground with our incredible leadership team out here in Colorado. And the cross-pollination and coordination that they've been doing has been incredible. And I think she's right. It's just beginning. And it takes really tough leaders like Katy and the people that she works with to bring these kinds of solutions. So thank you for that, Katy. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bernard McCune, and he is the Senior Executive Director for Career and College Success at Denver Public Schools, our big urban district. And he's going to share the district perspective, so we have that today as well. Thanks, Bernard.
Thank you so much, Carol. And I'd also like to thank all the teachers during this Teacher Appreciation Week, and also all the educators across the country. And so I love being on this panel with this great group of panelists. I am a first generation student from the projects in Chicago. And so when we talk about what school districts and a broader community can do, it is amazing what can happen when people in ordinary places actually give the best of themselves to young people, because that is what happened to me and so many other students. And so when we talk about how Denver Public Schools and we as an education community can best help students during this time, is that to have consistent high expectations for our students with aligned support. So the goal doesn't change at all. What we want is great life outcomes for our students. And so the method of delivery of education and a number of the services that we provide changes, but the expectations and the goals don't. And so some of the things that Denver Public Schools has been doing and coordinated efforts with the city and also the state is making sure that students are getting meals, students and families. We have distributed thousands of laptops and devices so students can connect to the internet, and so that as was said before, learning hasn't stopped. It has only just switched to being remotely. So again, we have tremendous teachers and staff who are making those efforts to connect with students and connecting with a number of students so that we can continue with their progress towards their goals. The other thing that this crisis gives us opportunity for is to authentically engage with the community. And so somebody talked earlier about all of the services that are in the community, and one of the biggest assets that any student can have is actually their parents. And that's something that Dr. Hernandez talked about. And so with this switch to remote learning, it has allowed us to see and actually utilize and make sure that parents are partners in the educational process. And so it has, I believe, forced districts or allowed them to take advantage of the opportunity and see the assets that parents are when you look at making sure there's educational excellence and success for students. The other thing we can do, and Carol mentioned this, is that we are a urban district. And so that is to make sure that as we are delivering remote learning to our students, that it is culturally responsive. And so that is the professional development that we are giving our educators as they deliver these remote lessons. And so again, I would just underscore that during crisis or really, really tough times, it can be, necessity can be the mother of invention or innovation. And so the educational landscape as we have known it is changed for right now and might be changing for the long run. We just have to make sure that changes for the better. And so how do we look at, again, educating students in a way that helps them reach their goals, so that if they want to become a doctor, like Dr. Hernandez, that they have every opportunity to do that, and that we as professionals in this space create the structures that will allow their brilliance to be shown and to flourish.
Thank you so much, Bernard. And a lot of that is those students having role models and people like you that they can see themselves in. So thank you for being that person. And I will also say that I don't think there's ever been a Teacher Appreciation Day when parents have appreciated teachers as much as this day. So all the people that are helping teachers with the home, schooling at home and everything is a huge piece of that right now. So our final panelist here, and then Carissa has some different questions for the panel, is Dr. Eddie Summers, who's Executive Director of the Bronx Private Industry Council. They work with an organization that was hatched out of Colorado called CareerWise, and we met through a common colleague in New York City. And Eddie, looking forward to your sharing what you all are doing in the Bronx and the ways in which COVID is influencing the workplace part of experiences that students can get while they're at the K-12 level. So welcome.
Great, and thank you, Carol, and thank you to all the other panelists. I'm excited to join my colleagues here, and I too want to extend appreciation out there to all the teachers during today and this week. I'm a single dad, and so I'm dealing with homeschooling, and I too have even greater appreciation having to homeschool my 7-year-old during this time, while also managing all the workload that we have here. I too am a first-generation college student, so I join the rest of our panelists in that commonality. I too is again the first one of my 11 siblings, so it was 12 of us. I'm number 8, but I was the first one to complete college, complete college, and then also pursue a doctorate as well. So that's something that we all have in common. So I want to talk a little bit about our parent organization, which is Here to Here, the Bronx Private Industry Council, and CareerWise New York, and then we'll get into what we've been doing here in the Bronx and throughout New York City to respond to some of the challenges with COVID-19. Here to Here was started several years ago as a lead intermediary in the Bronx, focused on creating and supporting career pathways for young people. And what we did was we decided that there are just so many career pathways that young people can pursue. And we noticed that in the Bronx, that these weren't being explored necessarily, and there wasn't necessarily the support for our high school teachers to really expose students and young people to the various career paths that exist. So Here to Here decided to really form a nonprofit that focused on how do we bridge the gap between the industries that exist in New York and the educators. So Here to Here serves as this intermediary where it brings together not only educators, but community-based organizations and employers together to figure out ways in which we enhance career pathways. So that's not only early exposure, but actually giving students work-based learning opportunities throughout their high school experience. And as Carol mentioned, one of the programs that Here to Here has launched is CareerWise New York, which is a 3-year apprenticeship program that we just launched last fall, 2019, where young people, over about 90 young people in New York, has had the opportunity to go to school part-time and to work about 16 hours a week with leading companies throughout New York City. So that's one way in which we're thinking of exposing young people to different types of career paths in business and finance and banking. Another program that we set up to really enhance the career paths is the Bronx Private Industry Council that focuses on a hyper-local approach to exposure and giving young people the exposure to the Bronx economy, where they actually live at. The Bronx is known for having a tremendous amount of small businesses in the Bronx compared to Manhattan, where it's a corporate center. And so we've decided that the Bronx PIC, as we call it, Private Industry Council, was focused on how do we coalesce the voice of small businesses, but give young people the opportunity to understand what it means to work at a small business of 2, 3, 4, or 5. With the Bronx Private Industry Council, we also set up a program called the Bronx PIC Incubator, which is a design thinking student consultancy, which it teaches young people how to problem solve through a design thinking methodology. And so the incubator works with companies to solve challenges. Thus far, we launched that program last summer and had our last cohort finished prior to COVID-19, ironically enough. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing in response to COVID-19. And then we have our work-based learning labs team that works with schools in the Bronx and throughout New York City to focus on how can they incorporate work-based learning activities into the curriculum. How can they expose young people at grade 9 to curriculum that prepares them to start to think about careers. And so that's what we've been set up to do, is this intermediary, bring in various sectors together to support career pathways. COVID-19.
We got about 2 minutes, so
Sure.
try to give us your pivot for COVID, and
Sure.
then we're going to go to questions.
I'm going there right now. So COVID-19 hits, and there, as many of the other panelists have spoken about, there's many challenges that our educational sector face. We pretty much, moved to remote learning here in New York. And what we were learning from some of our educators and some of our parents was that some of our young people didn't have access to technology and/or didn't have access to hotspots. And so what we've done is we've created what's called the Bronx Community Relief Effort, where we've had about 8 different verticals, one that's focused on education and technology and thinking about ways in which we support teachers during this period, but then ways in which we're supporting young people and their families. So we just last week had about 600 Chromebooks delivered, an additional 600 hotspots delivered, where we were partnering with our schools in our network, where we're giving out these Chromebooks and hotspots to make sure that young people have access to actually learning online. Many people know that the Bronx still remains one of the poorest congressional districts in the country. And so we still have massive poverty, the digital divide and poverty issues. So what we've also decided to do, much like many other folks, is we have a food program. And so we try to match food insecurity. New York City has led in this space. However, we've helped to supplement and complement the work that New York City is doing with food insecurity. So we're giving about an additional 26,000 meals per day to support the Bronx community. So we've done the technology and education, we've done food security. There are a number of other things that we're focused on, but let me pivot real quick to what we're thinking about doing and how we're going to try to continue to enhance career pathways. We are starting to think about remote work and virtual work, and how do we work with businesses to make sure that young people still have experiences and they're able to have work-based experiences virtually. So we're trying to lead in that area to develop programs that will speak to the business needs while also allowing young people to have work-based learning. I mentioned our Thinkubator experience, which we're gonna do, and part of our work with the Bronx Community Relief Effort is we're now engaged in students in the relief efforts. And the idea is that let the students problem solve. So we know that we have all these problems post-COVID. So what are some of the ways in which we could solve these problems as a community? And we want students to lead and be in a problem solvers of these challenges that we face. So those are some of the things that we're doing to supplement the work that our educators are doing and to support our educators as well.
Thank you so much, Eddie. And Carissa, back to you.
All right. I'm going to summarize a few things that I heard from folks that were through lines for what I'm hearing, and I'm going to come back and ask each of you to expand on something. Lawrence, thank you for starting with the story. I think we often forget to acknowledge that about ourselves, and I launched right into like, let's talk about the detail of all of this. So I just want to thank you for starting with the story, and each of you for sharing some of your stories. But each of you have talked about school being so much more than just education. And that's one of the key things that I'm pulling on this thread, that it's uncovered inequities that have always been there, but now are so much more pervasive and in our face, and our obligation to address in the variety of seats that we all sit in, right? And meeting students' social emotional needs. We didn't call it out, but it's Maslow's hierarchy and those main needs. I think, Bernard, you were talking about the level of that, and just making sure that we don't forget the connectivity to students and some of the ways in which we're doing that, and the community response. That this is a true community response, that it can't just be about the school, it can't just be about the governor and businesses, and it can't just be about the health sector. It's got to be that whole trifecta thinking about this. So, Lawrence, I'm going to come back to you. You used a phrase, I think I heard you say, healthy intrusiveness. Is that right? Tell us what that means.
Yes. So I think first and foremost, we cannot have a system that is dependent on extraordinary acts of humanity, simply like my dad. Now, just imagine if that president wasn't there. I wouldn't be here today, because we have a system that's dependent on these incredible acts from individuals. We have to create a culture simply the way that Bernard and Eddie talked about, and we are really at a tipping point. We already know there's a massive inequality gap in our system, in our society, but we have to do something about it. And I coined the phrase many years ago called healthy intrusiveness. I was working in East Palo Alto, California, and I was a student at Stanford, and I always saw the kids, talking about things, and I thought, you know what? I need to figure out a way to engage them without being in their business, because the kids said, hey, I don't want you to be in my business. So I thought, how can I bring them into the fold to start to talk about careers and life? And I call that healthy intrusiveness. It's being in their business without being in their business. And it's really what our parents did. It's sort of like, what they asked about what we were doing. And it's the way that we began to connect families. I mean, I'm in a community right now where we said that, no one was supposed to work, yet there are hundreds of Mexicano construction workers that have not missed a beat, that they are working every single day. And imagine the risks that they are at. But I've also taken the opportunity to be in their business a little bit and to find out, well, hey, what's going on? What are your kids doing right now? Because a lot of them, they're not learning. The quality of learning still has to take place. So we have to get out there and virtual house visits, physical house visits, whatever it takes. We have to be engaged in people's lives, and we cannot accept that barrier of, oh, it's the culture, it's the language, it's the distance. We have to get off our butts and go out there and engage in young people's lives and find out what they're doing and push them. And I call that healthy intrusiveness, because it is intrusive, but it's healthy because it's shaking people's lives up in a different direction.
Thanks, Lawrence. I appreciate that. Actually, I'm going to pick up on, Bernard, you talked about connecting with students. That was one of the themes that I drew out. Can you talk to us about how you're doing that in Denver? And it, you know, with all the challenges that you normally have that Lawrence just put out there, but now even in a harder environment.
Yeah, so we're connecting with students in a number of different ways, from the courses that they take and their teachers connecting with them with remote learning. But we also have counselors who are connecting with students around what are their career interests and how do we get them into internships, following up on ICAPs. We have tremendous partners in Denver and in the state of Colorado. So a lot of our higher ed institutions are working with us, with students, through concurrent enrollment to connect with students. We have partners like the Denver Scholarship Foundation, who is helping our counselors with college advising. And then we also have our Office of Family and Community Engagement, who is helping lead the efforts around getting families and students food. But we also have our Student Voice and Leadership, who actually today is hosting one of their town halls. They have been hosting virtual town halls for students throughout this period. So there are a number of ways we're doing that. And then I do want to add, when we talk about connecting with students, what we have to do as an educational community is make sure that we are training people to deal with the trauma that our students are facing now and the trauma that they will still face and exhibit when they come back to school in the fall. So that is one thing that we have to make sure we do for our students, but also our staff, so that we can better connect them and meet students where they are and help them get to where they want to be. But we also have to, again, make sure, and this is for the entire educational community, that we also deal with and address the trauma that our staffs are experiencing right now, so that when we come back, we can be not only a blessing to ourselves, but to others.
Thank you, Bernard. I underscore the social emotional needs of everyone involved, and absolutely. Katy, I want to come to you on this theme of connecting with students, and you talked about a needs assessment that you had done in Colorado. What did you find were some of the biggest needs? And if you want to share, I know Bernard is in Denver, but share other ways you've seen across Colorado for connecting with students.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, piggybacking directly on to what Bernard said, the number one need, actually, we made some assumptions when we sent this needs assessment out around what would come back. And we thought it would be Wi-Fi and devices and online learning platforms. And in fact, the number one need was social emotional support. All of our districts across the state of Colorado said that they need more tools, more support, more thinking about how do they support their students, and to Bernard's point, how do they support each other, because everybody's going through this and it's affecting everybody in different ways. So that came through really loud and clear. The very next item was technical supports for delivering remote learning. So there are still a lot of gaps in our state there. And then online instructional supports for teachers. So I think both Lawrence and Bernard talked about that actually, you know, though we've done some blended learning over time and we have some pockets of online learning, this is a very new environment for the majority of our teachers. And even though they are patching everything together and they're doing the best they can and they turned on a dime, we actually need many, many more supports for how do you instruct in a blended learning manner. And I think we're actually going to need that moving forward into next year because, you know, all signs are pointing to next year being a disruptive year as well. We're trying to do the best we can to get schools started again and open and personal connections going again. But we know that COVID-19 is here for the next year. So we're going to have to figure out better, more high quality ways to pivot back and forth between online learning, remote learning, in-person learning, small group learning, back to remote learning. And so we're trying to bridge all those gaps and we're trying to use some of our CARES funds to get out to districts so that they can identify those needs and support them.
Thanks, Katie. Eddie, you talked about, one of the questions I was going to ask you was how are you doing career pathway work and some of these internships and things like that with remote learning? And you talked a little bit about this whole idea of like the telework environment that, you know, we're all in now and using that for students. Can you just talk a little bit about that and how you stay connected with students in that way?
Sure. So let me first talk about a little bit about how we've stayed connected, and then I'll touch upon that. So at Here to Here, CareerWise New York, and the Bronx PIC, we've focused on working with our student ambassadors. We do have a group of students who have participated in a number of our programs who serve as our ambassadors and sort of serve as the student's voice to stay engaged. I liked what I heard earlier from Dr. Hernandez about healthy intrusiveness. That's the way in which we used it, not used, but we work with these student ambassadors to really be our eyes and ears and to let us know what's happening right on the ground. So we've done a lot of work with engaging student ambassadors and really surveying them about what do students need during this time and what do students want during this time. One of our initial reactions initially when COVID-19 hit was, all right, yes, we know that there's remote learning, but immediately let's get back to figuring out how students should also do their internships or do their apprenticeships. And what we learned from students was like, hold on, like we're dealing with this just like everybody else. Like we need time, we need space to digest this and to deal with our new reality. And so that was part of our reason why we immediately didn't restart some of our programming in terms of internships and apprenticeships. And so we've communicated through our ambassadors. With our remote learning, what we've learned was that the city of New York had directives that when COVID-19 hit, let's stop all programming, not only physically going to schools, but also internships and apprenticeship programs. We recently got the city to agree that the apprentice program in particular was an important part of a student's learning experience. And because we constructed the program where students, similar to CareerWise Colorado, where a part of the students' learning is actually going to work. It's a part of their curriculum. So we was able to convince New York City to restart that program. And what we're doing is working with the businesses that we work with to structure a program where students are able to work like we are, and that they're able to check in when students first are supposed to report in and check in midday, and to have different checkpoints and competencies that a student must achieve throughout projects that they're working on, for instance. So we've worked really carefully with our partners in CareerWise Colorado to really construct a remote learning program that are able to allow young people to learn how to work remotely, because I think we're still all learning how to do this. And then two, to be able to still feel like they're achieving progress or making progress on the projects that they're given by their respective companies. And our goal really is to take what we're learning from CareerWise Colorado and to develop these virtual internships throughout the summertime that focus on, first and foremost, let's teach young people how to remote work, because again, adults, we're learning this, but then how do we roll this out to more companies so that they are giving young people these opportunities to learn?
And Carissa, we thank you, Eddie. We have a question. Let me just read it to you and we can just see if one person wants to pick it up. Is that okay, Carissa?
Actually going to do it. Well, I saw the question from
Oh,
Timothy.
you did. Okay.
Yeah. I'll summarize and hopefully I get it right. It's,
Perfect.
finding it difficult to navigate the professional scene while remaining true to my heart-centered goals. I feel that I have this intense attitude that sometimes comes off as angry or mad, even though I'm not. Any tips on how I navigate this? I'll just say to you, I often feel this way. It's the feeling of like, people don't understand like what it's like, right? Where you came from or what it's, I grew up in a very rural, small area. If you haven't read my bio, very different. And it was like, I sometimes am like, have to shake my head and go, you gotta be kidding me. People don't understand that. Particularly, I'll be honest, living out on the East Coast, it feels like a foreign world sometimes. And so look at it this way. I'm an ambassador to helping people understand. And I use it in a way to bring people in and have a conversation with them and help them understand versus being angry that they may not have understood. So I look at myself as an ambassador for students who are where I came from or students who might follow me. So I'll look it up for anybody else who wants to jump in on that.
I would agree with Carissa. I too born and raised in the South Bronx during the 80s, so it was very rough. And I know I experienced that during my undergrad days as well, but I've learned since my professional career is to be that ambassador similar to Carissa and to be one of trying to understand and trying to communicate more effectively. And I think working on sort of those skills may be helpful for you as you go through your studies as a pre-med student.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in on that as well. So I love the fact that Timothy talks about remaining to his heart-centered goal and his true self. And so one of the things in my journey is that I prayed always to be true to myself. And then so one of the things that Timothy could do is to try to find mentors that might have similar experiences and take a step back sometimes and think about what his ultimate goal and mission is, the greater goal and mission, and how does he achieve that? So the structures that frustrate him, how does he actually be that change that he wants to see? And so, but you need somebody to talk to and help you through that process because it is something that others have figured out and people are figuring out. So that would be my advice.
I'll just close us out. I think a couple of us have a hard stop on. I want to thank all of our panelists. I'll also say, Timothy, that sometimes it's about finding the right organization or place to work. And got to meet your needs as much as it is what you think the expectation is. And that's a hard thing to overcome when you've worked so hard to be the first in your family to graduate. It's hard to let go of like what seems to be success and redefine what success is for you that matches those goals for you. But I'll just thank my fellow panelists, and I believe, Carol, you're going to keep people on here for a while, but it's to be a part of this. Thank you.
You bet. We'll do a close real quick in the next minute. There will be a talk back in about a minute and a half with Lawrence and Bernard and Eddie, who can stay and answer some more of your questions. I want to just let you know that we have programs every day for the rest of this week to celebrate educators. One on how we will return to school when we do tomorrow. The next one will be on equity consciousness, special needs, and diversity. With Yvette Jackson, also from New York City. And then early childhood equity, or equity begins in early childhood with Dr. Lisa Roy and her panel. And then I want to also just share that next week we're doing a whole program called Celebrate Graduates 2020. And every single day we have different graduation speeches, culminating on Friday afternoon with a graduation party with Aussie Media. And there'll be a bunch of different rooms people can go in, and we're looking forward to all of that. So thank you so much to Carissa and Lawrence, Bernard, Katie, Eddie, all of you were tremendous. And I think it just shows so many different perspectives that we need to be able to tackle and deliver the really great solutions to take us forward in a bigger way. We couldn't have gone forward without this crisis. So thanks to all of you. And for those of you who want to stay for the talk back, Katie and Carissa have to jet, but we'll do that for a few minutes. And thanks again. And thank you for all attending. Any of you who are educators, working with educators, very much appreciate everything you do every single day of the year. So thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
All right. And let's see here if we've got some folks that want to stay. If you all want to, Timothy, any other questions? Anybody else who has questions? We've got Bernard, Eddie, and Lawrence who are willing to stay and do some time for the next 15 minutes with what we call talk back, which is Lisa will turn off the recording so that it's private. And this has been a real nice time the last few weeks for people to share